The cinematic church of horror is a cathartic and challenging sanctum for its congregation. In this timeless chamber, the wind of cultural history whispers through stone walls, decorated with the iconography of symbolic and supernatural power. This is a spiritual screen chosen by an audience who willingly seek confrontation with death, supernatural forces, and the primal fear of the unknown. House of Leaves Publishing presents a collection of writings exploring the cultural history of religion in horror cinema. Scared Sacred, Idolatry, Religion, and Worship in the Horror Film is edited by Rebecca Booth, author of The Devil Rides Out, part of the Devil's Advocate series from Mature Publishing. Aaron Thompson, owner and editor of the Backseat Driver Reviews, and R.F. Todd, managing director of House of Leaves. The book developed in response to the recent reclaiming of the fusion between supernatural and religious themes in mainstream horror cinema, and brings together leading critics, historians, and writers in the horror community to tackle this theological topography. In addition to an introduction by author and theologian Professor Douglas E. Cohen, the book also features a foreword from actor and author Doug Bradley, who brought to life perhaps the most iconic figure in religious horror cinema. Thematically, the book is divided into 4 sections to provide a well-rounded analysis of world religion, idolatry, and worship, covering a diverse range of subjects, from atheism to auditory hallucination, martyrdom to medieval witch, and zealotry to zolatry. The outpouring of support and interest in Scared Sacred has been heartwarming, and we hope you enjoy the book. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We couldn't have picked better company. For more, head to holpublishing.com.
Welcome on, bienvenue, welcome to the United Nations of Horror. Hi everyone, we've been away for a little while, but we're back. And I'm joined today by Becky and Lucard. Hi guys.
Oh, very good to be back. I've missed you both.
We've missed you. Right, Becky, you have been busy, right? Busy. Apart from technology, our curse of technology we've been suffering, you've been super busy too. So you've had a lot going on this week, but you've come on to talk about nuns, haven't you?
Yes. Who wouldn't? How could I resist?
The nuns brought you back.
The nuns brought you back. Okay, I think I better reveal what we're talking about now. This is interesting. This isn't quite horror, is it? What we're talking about. This is kind of sideways to horror. There's a bit of psychodrama. The horror kind of happens right at the end of this film. We are talking a film from 1947, a British psychological drama, which is not something you see from the 40s, but there you go, called Black Narcissus, and it's all about nuns, right? So but scary stuff happens in it, so it's very intense. So yeah, let's talk about this Black Narcissus. Right, I have seen this film many times. It's one of my favorite films. It has been at one point or another my top film out of all films. Yeah, but that list revolves. It's probably top 10 for me now, but at one point this was my favorite film of all movies ever. That's how much I liked it. Okay. So Becky, look out. Now, Becky, have you seen this before? Is this the first time watch?
No, I've seen it before. This was, I think, a university watch, film school, and yeah, just fell in love with it. Same time, I think, around when I watched Peeping Tom.
Okie doke. There's a connection. We'll come back to that. There's an obvious connection. We'll come back to that. Lucard, the first time watch for you?
First time watch for me, yeah.
Oh, and I believe you watched
special.
it today as well, so you're fresh.
Indeed.
Okay, we have the rather wonderful. So this is by the directors Powell and Pressburger, probably some of the most sophisticated British cinema filmmakers of the era, other than Hitchcock, perhaps. These two were really delivering something that was not really seen in the rest of British cinema, maybe even the rest of world cinema with what they were doing. Well, okay, Becky, what's your thoughts?
On the film in general?
Yes, film in general.
Like you said, I think it's definitely one of probably the best portrayal of nuns, and it's really interesting because it's Anglican nuns, and we obviously always usually get Catholic depictions.
Yes. It was interesting because I remembered it being Anglican. I've seen it so many times, and I was thinking this is Anglican nuns, but occasionally they do actually harp on about the Virgin Mary a bit, which feels very Catholic to me. And I actually had to go to Wikipedia and check. This is Anglican nuns, right? I mean, you can kind of tell from the outfits because they're not wearing black, are they? It's all white.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. See, I didn't realize that when I was watching the film, but wow, okay, that definitely kind of makes a difference for me now, thinking about that.
Yeah. So these are there are such a thing as Anglican monks and Anglican nuns, and these are Anglican nuns. So it's kind of a slightly different thing. It gives it an English slant as well, rather than a sort of Roman Catholic slant.
Very
it's
much
kind of
so.
interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting in terms of the themes that are explored, which I'm sure we'll get into, but, you know, the sexuality and desire and everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of want to get, when we just want to get your general thoughts first, and mine too, and then we could kind of maybe talk about some of the things, because I think rather than scene by scene, it's more about the feels with this one, right? It really is. So when you first saw it, you liked it then, right?
Oh yeah,
Becky.
I adored it. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's just a beautiful looking film.
It is a beautiful film. It's one of those ones that really draws you in. It's kind of, when you first start, it's kind of this is a bit odd, but yeah, I'm going to keep watching it. And before you know it, the film's ended. It's one of those, I find. Ricard, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, it was the same for me. I think I noticed very quickly just the quality of the film. That's noticeable and very apparent from the first scene. You know, the colors are still quite vivid to this day, and the sets are just lavish.
Yeah, and it's got that weird sort of painted backdrop. You know, they've not got the real mountains in a lot of it. It's all painted, which gives it a sort of fantasy air as well, doesn't it? Doesn't detract, I don't think.
I'm thinking it's probably sets they're using, but you know, for whatever reason, I like sets. I agree with you that it's makes it almost like a fantasy setting.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that particularly Powell was quite adamant normally to use location shooting, but for this one he wanted to use the actual studio setting, and he used a lot of painted glass. I think for the the backgrounds and that, which just like you say lends it a kind of an ethereal quality to the film.
Yeah, indeed.
Absolutely.
Just before we talk about this specific film and the sort of elements of it, have you guys seen any other Powell and Pressburger movies? Shall I throw out a few titles to help with this?
Yeah.
Things like Matter of Life and Death, I Know Where I'm Going, The Red Shoes, Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. Those were the most famous collaborations between these two. There's a few others too, but have you seen any of those, Becky? Any others?
Yep, all of them. And
all of them, right.
Yeah.
I've seen all of them except the Canterbury Tower. I still haven't seen that, so which I'm kind of ashamed about. Lucard, do any of those titles? Sorry, I should have said Matter of Life and Death. In America, it's called Stairway to Heaven.
Okay.
If that helps.
I have seen Stairway to Heaven, but the other films, no. Unfortunately not.
Yeah.
I'm the odd one out here, but I would like to see more of their work now, just based on that.
Yeah. Stairway to Heaven or Matter of Life and Death and Black Narcissus is probably the most famous pieces, but the other ones are
and The Red
quite well
Shoes.
regarded.
I'd say.
Yeah, I agree. The red shoes too. That's something else too. An interesting psychodrama in its own right that actually fed into a more recent horror film, Black Swan. I feel there's certainly elements of Black Swan were kind of reflected what went on in the red shoes. However, okay, let's get back to this film. Right, so we got Deborah Kerr as Sister Clodagh, isn't it? Now, Deborah Kerr...
Who doesn't have an Irish accent, which is hilarious because she's meant to be from Ireland.
Yeah, she is from... Yeah,
I noticed that.
And Clodagh is a very Irish name as well, so it kind of also feels a bit odd as well. But yes, she's very, very English, is Deborah Kerr, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And not a stranger to the horror genre. You know, she was like in The Innocents, for example, another classic horror film. But in this, she is the head of this particular order in this particular place. It is interesting to set up scene as the old Mother Superior kind of frowning because she clearly thinks Deborah Kerr's too young to do this, right? So there's a bit of it almost setting up the foul, it feels like, before they even get there.
Yeah, I think she even says something to that effect too, like, you're too young. It's like, well, thanks for the help, lady.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I like the whole sequence of them picking the various nuns they're going to take, and the reasons why Sister Honey and Sister Ruth, because she needs some, things like that. It's
Sounds
kind
like
of an
a band
interesting
name.
Was there any particular performances that stood out for you, Lucard?
I thought all the performances were very strong. I did think, and I'm blanking on the name now, but the guy who was always helping them out had sort of a Christopher Lee quality to him.
Yeah, Mr. Dean, wasn't it?
Yes,
Mr. Dean.
Indeed, yeah. He definitely
David
has
Farrar.
Yeah, I had never seen him in anything before, I don't believe.
He super charismatic man,
yes.
Right? Which they really needed for this, because he was the one kind of stirring up the nuns a bit.
A bit. We'll get to that. Wiki to my notes.
Yeah, he's in the way the nuns were around him, and him, not so much him with the nuns, because he really wasn't interested in him at all. It reminded me a little of Clint Eastwood's The Beguiled, and in fact the more recent version of The Beguiled. That kind of interaction, a group of women and one man, and that sort of psychodrama.
That's what I thought of too.
But you could, he was very masculine, wasn't he? And it kind of, the nuns, I think, had trouble dealing with it. Sister Clodagh did her best. It wasn't.
Come on. To be fair, like, throughout the film, he is in, greater states of undress as it goes on.
Yeah, he really is.
It's funny that every time it turns up, he's got less clothes on. And doesn't he at one point turn up with a pair of shorts, and that's it?
No, yeah, exactly. So at the beginning, I was like, those are short shorts, and I was I was so distracted. I've got it written down here by his legs, and it's really interesting because it really kind of captures that female position, I think, in terms of the nuns and what's going on. But it was just, he was kind of being objectified in one way, but you're saying he wasn't really interested in them, but he seemed to enjoy stirring them up as well.
He was a troll. Yeah, he was trolling them a bit, wasn't he? He didn't think they should be there. He was kind of angry they were there, which I think actually meant somewhat that he didn't like how they were making him feel. They were stirring up things that he wanted to forget or something. I think there was a bit of that as well. Going on, but it did make me laugh how my daughter, who's just turned 18, she made a comment that goes, it's really weird to see a film where the women are like completely covered and there's a man who's hardly got any clothes on.
That's a brilliant point.
Like,
yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of funny, and it is funny how the men are almost the objects in this. I mean, the young prince is kind of all prettied up and got lush clothes. Apart from, is it Chang? I'm forgetting the name. Kanji. Gene Simmons. can she?
Yeah.
The women were very demure and apart from the very end, they were very sort of wearing the same thing. I mean, the nun's outfit is pretty striking, right? But it's demure.
Yeah.
100%. And that's what I love about this. It's a film about female sexual desire.
It is. I also read a quote. A critic said the film is ultimately about failure, being able to, not being able to do what trying to do something and not achieving it, which I think is a much smaller subtext, actually.
Yeah.
But,
it's interesting. I can see that in terms of Cloda's personal story arc, but I think personally I would say that it's more about grief. No matter where you kind of stand religiously watching the film, it's about the loss of your dreams, your desires, sacrificing something for the greater good, if that makes sense, or the bigger picture, or where the path kind of takes you, fate, if you will. I thought it was really interesting, but definitely Cloda, I think, in terms of the failure aspect.
Yeah, it was also it was also about not just grief. It was about not thinking you've escaped memories, thinking you've escaped a past and being at peace, but something about the present dragging that back up. And that happened with the older nun, who was the gardener, wasn't it? Yeah. And stuff like that.
Totally. And I think that it's also about the subjugation of female desire, and how that is just generally in society is not allowed in any society. Was used to house, I believe, like concubines.
On Wikipedia they used an interesting word. They call it a seraglio, which is a place, a living quarters for women and concubines in the Ottoman Empire. A sort of Muslim sort of structure. Harem is another word, I guess. So it used to be they call it the House of Women, which means really different things given the context.
Well, that's it. But also exactly the same. These are two groups of women who are both caged in the service of a higher power that's inherently patriarchal.
Yes, I agree.
So
I
true.
agree. Obviously we get no history at all of what went on before, but we get the pictures on the walls, right, which are constantly there. And does Sister Cloda say something about painting them? And they say, no, you don't do that. I like the old lady as well, the housekeeper. She was like was like a pixie-ish presence, wasn't she? She did make me laugh a lot.
Oh, me too. I think she was already crazy, even before the nuns went crazy.
And I think one of the most telling scenes is where I've forgotten the name again. Kanchi,
I think.
Kanchi. I always get it wrong. Kanchi. She's done something rotten and she gets caught out, doesn't she? Steals something, and the young prince is standing over her, and the old lady gives him a rod, say, "Go on, punish her, become a man."
It's
like, whoa.
Was like
your grandfather, she says, who was the general, I think, who had the seraglio, is it?
Yeah, seraglio. I looked it up because it's got a really weird. It sounds like you just said it, but serralo is how you say it, apparently. It's not a word I'm familiar with. So they've inherited this place who wants them to, and they're a working order, aren't they? They're not a contemplative order. They're a working order, so they're sort of teaching the children and the the teenagers sort of skills and stuff like that. And they don't want any men there, but the prince wants to be taught, doesn't he? And so they make an exception because he kind of he's their patron, really, so they haven't really got much choice. I liked all the different distinct characters. One thing I found interesting is Sister Ruth, who we'll be getting onto, looks quite similar to Sister Cloda when they're in full regalia. And sometimes it was, especially in mid-shot, it was hard to tell them apart. I think that was deliberate, though. What do you think, Becky?
I do, and coming back to my point about in terms of female desire and sexuality and that repression, one is embracing it, you know, spoiler alert, by the end of the film, and the other is really trying to contain it, even though her heart is, you know, telling us something else. And it's that duality and that kind of mirror.
Yeah. It's it's an interesting one. I like all the nuns were almost a reflection of Clodagh. Not quite all of them, but I certainly think Sister Honey was kind of a bit, and Sister Philippa, who did the garden. Sister Bryony, who ran the infirmary, was the one that didn't feel like part of her personality. She seemed like her own thing to me. And Sister Ruth was like the crazy side of Sister Clodagh. That's how it felt to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Was there any particular standout scenes for you, Becky?
I mean, I think the dialogue is great. There's a little interaction early on between Mr. Dean and Sister Clodagh about the coffee that one of I think it's Sister Bryony's making. And it's very... it's humorous. You know, they talk about how she makes terrible coffee and there's grit in it. And as he drinks it, he says, oh, speaking of medicine, you know, it's really cleverly written. And on the back of that, I think you get some really interesting subtext, because when he brings Kanchi, I think that's how you say her name, the young woman from the village to join.
The dodgy one. Who appears to be possibly a concubine of Dean. I couldn't quite read it.
That's the whole. That's the thing. The
with
subtext.
Dean.
Exactly. As she's taken in by the nuns, and he, you know, is quite sarcastic and tells Sister Clodagh, you know, isn't it you're in the business of saving souls, when she says, you know, we don't want to look after her if you know, she's causing trouble in the village or whatever. And she takes her in and she looks at him, and he's like, is there anything you want to ask me? You know, and it's that kind of subtext for the time, I think, which was quite, you know, and also with Kanchi and the young general, when he refuses to whip her and he tells her to stand up, she kneels at one point and just looks up at him, and it's very, very sexual. And I was surprised for the time, you know, 1947, they got away with that. But again, I think that's just really great writing, so that stood out. And also, and I can't remember the name of the sister who looks after the garden, but it was just really sad.
Sister Philippa.
I just thought it was really, you know, again, she was kind of mourning the life that she's given up and her memories, the sacrifice she's made, and for earthly pleasures, whatever, you know. And she plants, instead of, I think it's vegetables in the garden, obviously for sustenance, she plants beautiful flowers. And it's just it's a really tragic little tiny moment. And, you know, it really stood out for me, that one, I think.
Yeah, I think there's some really good moments with Sister Philippa. Flora Robson is the actress playing Sister Philippa. There's a really great bit where she says, she's talking to Sister Clodagh, she goes, there's something about this place, it's the wind or the clearness of the air. I just can't, you know, I have to keep thinking of the past. And Sister Clodagh says, you just got to work harder. And she holds her hands out and she's got these broken calluses and, you know, stuff like that. She obviously can't work any harder than she already is. And it's a really telling little scene with very little dialogue. Again, like you say, there's some really lovely little scenes and touches throughout this film. Super colourful film and very dreamlike in many ways, isn't it? In many ways.
And I think that was the reason for the glass painting, that they really wanted to go for these like hues. And in terms of the settings, I think, and I'll touch on this again when we talk about Sister Ruth, but very much, I think, particularly not just like Italian horror, but Dario Argento must have been very influenced by this film watching it again. In terms of the set design, really reminded me of Suspiria and the colours. And also Inferno.
That is a really good connection that I hadn't seen before. But when you think about some of the hyper reality scenes in Suspiria, it's very much drawing on this. It feels like, actually.
Well, can we jump ahead to spoilers, or shall I wait?
Yeah, no. I mean, this film is from 1947. I don't think we have to worry too much about spoilers. But let's just say right now, this is the point where we will be spoiling the rest of the film. If you haven't seen this film, do yourself a favour, see it. I'll say no more than that. You can stop here if you wish or not. But honestly, I don't think we're spoiled any. It's one of those films that I don't think can be spoiled, actually. But it is nice to be surprised. Let's put it that way. Yes, go ahead, Becky.
So just to say that when Sister Ruth becomes, and the best word I can think for this is unleashed, because she's rejoicing in the freedom of basically, what's the word? Renouncing the order. And
yes.
She is dressed in, I think it's black or a pale blue dress, makeup, hair done. And she, especially because she's so erratic at that time in the film, she really seems to... the character I think that really is influenced by her is Meta Tenebarum in the Three Mothers trilogy, Argento's second film, Inferno.
Oh, you see that, do you? Yes.
Yeah, Veronica Lazar, I think, plays her. And if you like, if you're familiar with the film, you'll know. But if you actually look at the actress right at the end of the film, when she's kind of laughing, maniacally, she really does look a lot like the actress here, Kathleen Byron.
Kathleen Byron, who gives a great performance, who is the mad Sister Ruth.
And it didn't really occur to me till the rewatch again, but it just seems so similar that I really, and especially sister, mother superior, mother, all the different mothers in the Three Mothers trilogy. There's really interesting connection, I thought.
Yes, I think there's something there. It's not. I'd have to watch those films again, I think, to sort of sit and think it through a bit more. But yeah, I can kind of see it for sure. It's interesting that it's almost the Jekyll and Hyde tale in many ways, isn't it? It's like Sister Cloda's the sort of Apollonian, spiritual one, and Sister Ruth is the sort of Bacchanalian sort of pleasures, in the immediate now. A Mr. Hyde kind of character. There's definitely a touch of that about this, and the fact they look quite similar kind of augments that somewhat, I'd say. Do you think that's fair? Lucas?
Yeah, I think so.
Becky? Yeah, it's there's something deep going on here.
It's almost like when she goes crazy, she sort of, she's embodying freedom, but also I think the way they film it, it's almost like showing good versus evil, with the Mother Superior character in more of the kind of light. I guess white colors, and then obviously she's dressed in the very dark kind of blackish blue colors. I thought the contrast there was pretty cool.
Yeah, and also when she's moving through the house, and they're both moving through the house towards the climax, there's some amazing shots.
Oh yeah,
where it's tracking between floors and stuff like that. There's just some amazing shots. In many ways, I'll tell you what, it's anything you can think of where there's like a good and evil characterization. And as I say, there's like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. You could almost say she was almost kind of Jokerish, crazy off the leash, do what you want kind of stuff going on. Also, It made me think. I had a chuckle because it reminded me of an episode of Star Trek where there's Captain Kirk gets separated into a good and an evil Kirk, and the good one is all very nice but can't really make decisions, and the evil one's all like
overact.
A lot of overacting, a lot of grabbing.
I love that episode.
Yeoman Rand and all that. There's such of that, and I felt that episode was kind of channeling this movie a bit as well.
I could see that, but it's funny that she represents almost like we're talking about like the evil side, even though really, if you think about it, she's the one who has been like suppressed for so long, and I think this film does a really kind of a great job at examining religion and sort of all that nuns give up. I wouldn't even say this is it's not really an exploitative film, although maybe at the time it was considered controversial and exploitative, but I think today you look at it and you say, man, like the things these women gave up and had to do, and it's kind of sad in a way.
It was.
I think so.
Yeah, it's There was a few other points about this film in terms of the context of when it was made. It was noted that this film came out a couple of months just before India achieved independence, and like everyone in sort of Britain was kind of aware of that, and certain reviewers, film critics, suggested this when the British audience viewed this, it was kind of they were treating it as like a goodbye to India kind of thing, as the nuns were leaving. It felt like that it fed into that zeitgeist of the time, which is kind of interesting. Wouldn't mean anything to us, but it was kind of interesting that was kind of possibly one way it was viewed, at a meta level as well. Kind of
especially
interesting.
with the casting of Gene Simmons as Kanchi, when you had other actors who were, in terms of ethnicity, were from the region.
Yeah. And they did. I mean, Powell and Pressburger did use a lot of some of the cast were certainly from the region. There were some of the actors were, they weren't. They were made up to look that way, as was Gene Simmons.
It's probably a studio interference thing, I'm guessing.
Yeah, but a lot of the
usual.
Children and so on were certainly from the Indian subcontinent, weren't they? And
yeah.
It definitely worked. It's I mean, it's better. Was there any downside to this film, do you think? But Becky, any sort of thing you had any issues with, either in the past or now?
No, I mean, just touching on what Jason said there, I think that the portrayal of Sister Ruth was really interesting because it's mentioned before they leave that she is ill, and it's not kind of identified in terms of whether that's physical or in terms of her mental health. And throughout the film, in terms of female hysteria and the way that her obsession develops with Mr. Dean, and then this antagonistic relationship with Sister Clodagh around that, seems to be more framed around mental health issues, and they call her crazy, for example. And
yes.
One question I had for you both was, would you consider this to be a possession film, particularly in the way that she's framed, some of the shots of her, the way she's looking?
I'd never thought of it that way. I feel it's more a kind of... I think it still feels very modern, this film, in many ways. I know it's melodramatic, but it still feels very modern. And it feels to be more of a stalker parable in the last act. Rather than possession, but it could be, I guess.
Yeah.
It certainly could have been worked into the text and become more overtly that, actually, given their where they were housed and so on. But it's interesting that even though the house was quite beautiful, it wasn't really a character. The wind was a character more than the house. Do you know what I mean? And maybe some of the paintings, but I'm not sure. What do you think, Lucas?
I was thinking that it seemed a bit possession-like, and in fact, when I was watching the beginning, I was thinking, like, I don't know if we can consider this horror or not. And then when this part came about, I was like, okay, now I see the horror elements here, and why we're covering this. And also, I know we want to lead into more kind of Nunsploitation in the future, but man, you really can't start with a better film than this, because there are so many elements in this movie. So yeah, I definitely could see it a little bit. There's definitely, at least I think there's an argument to be made for sure. And I think during that time period, they could have easily said, "Oh, she's possessed by the devil."
In fact, that made me. If it was a Catholic nuns rather than Anglican nuns, I think that would have been more developed, perhaps, as well. I think because it was Anglican English, we don't really, we're Catholic. It's not the same as Catholicism. Devil is not really a thing in Anglican. So it is really yourself. If stuff happens, it's you. It's not some external thing. Whereas in Catholicism, it's the devil is considered a real thing in many Catholics. I've got to be careful here.
Which I think makes it more interesting, I think.
Yeah. Yes, it does. It does indeed. This film also influenced lots of other films. Martin Scorsese loves this film, and there's certain shots in some of his films which kind of hark back to this and some other Powell and Pressburger films. And apparently, the look and feel of Disney's Frozen is massively influenced by Black Narcissus.
Oh wow!
Which I should have said. I didn't say. The cinematographer of this movie was the great Jack Cardiff, and the art director in Frozen, Michael Giammo, really loves Jack Cardiff. So it's interesting. I'm going to go back and watch Frozen and just see if I can see it myself.
Yeah.
The more I talk about it, the more I think, you know what? Women in sweeping dresses in high places in mountains. Yeah, I can kind of see this.
And also worth noting, I think, as well, that Jack Cardiff won the Academy Award for cinematography that year for Black Narcissus.
Yes. Yeah, I can see why he would, because it is a beautifully shot film. You think of other films from this time period, and they are often kind of like the camera doesn't move very much in a lot of older films, but the camera's it's moving, it's not, but it's not distracting either. It's perfectly done, I would say.
Yeah, the only films that were really using colour and this sort of sweeping stuff really in the 40s were musicals, I think.
Right.
There was very little other film, if you say Wizard of Oz, perhaps, but also the MGM musicals, but they were not in the same way. The direction is not as advanced as it is in this film, I don't think.
Which is why I think that, Peeping Tom was such a revelation, and why, poor, Michael Powell, his career was effectively ruined overnight, wasn't it?
Ruined. Yeah, let's talk about that a bit. Yeah, one of the directors, Michael Powell of the Powell and Pressburger, were the directors, went on to do Peeping Tom, which came out pretty much within a few months of Psycho, right? And Psycho and Peeping Tom have got very similar elements, but Hitchcock was lauded, well, maybe not so much at the time, but his career didn't particularly suffer badly for doing Psycho, whereas Michael Powell's career was wrecked because everyone thought it was an abominable film, and the terms like that were being used. They thought it was like a pornographic kind of horror film, and his career was wrecked, wasn't it? Really,
it's a shame.
Which is a shame.
Yeah,
it's such a great film as well.
It is, especially when you view it through a modern scope. It's almost funny. I shouldn't say funny, but I should say it's actually sad that it was viewed in almost a pornographic way,
Yeah, critics really didn't like it. It's an interesting, sophisticated film examining some elements of sexuality, but of also things like fear and voyeurism and stuff like that. Again, Martin Scorsese really loves Peeping Tom.
And I think this film is very much a kind of gateway into, or a segue into that film, and you see a lot of the themes in this one and such. If you start to kind of match the dots, but so it's a real shame, I think.
Yeah, I think of the Powell and Pressburger films, Black Narcissus and The Red Shoes are the most psychologically intense ones. Is my opinion. The other ones are a lot lighter or deal with more broader themes, whereas in this film is about repression and failure, somewhat, to try and control, to try and repress, and it's really hard to think of films that deal with it better than this, really, because it's ambiguous while being really plain if you think about stuff.
Yeah,
does that
when
make sense?
No, totally. And like when you compare films like a Nun, is it the Nun story, or a Nun story, the Nun story,
Yeah.
to it, obviously you can see the difference. Yeah, completely.
Yeah, I'd like to. Well, I was talking about this film to my daughter. I was saying I'd like to have seen Maria from Sound of Music put into this nunnery and see what she'd have gone crazy within about 2 weeks with the wind, and or the other nuns would have beat her to death or something.
How do you solve a problem like Maria? Over the cliff.
Yeah, it's over the cliff. Quite an ending too. I mean, I did mention right at the beginning, this isn't our usual horror film, is it? This is not really a horror film until perhaps the last 10 minutes, would you say?
Yeah, it's a very slow kind of burn. I feel like some audiences today, they might not have the patience for it, but man, like, it's worth waiting for.
Yeah, just
yeah,
for,
I will.
I'd say just
Sorry,
for Mr. Dean's mankini by the end of the film.
I've got shorts like that. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, mine are denim though. So.
Daisy Dukes.
Yes, Daisy Dukes. That's right. It's kind of interesting. We also know what's going to happen. There's a foreshadowing right at the beginning. Mr. Dean says, "I'll give them till the monsoon." That's how long they'll last. And as they ride out, the monsoon starts. So there's kind of Mr. Dean was right.
Yeah, he was a fascinating character too, because it seemed like he just sort of wanted to be left alone, and I kind of got the impression, and maybe it's just me reading too much into this, but I know at one point he says something to the effect of, I'll have the boy go and get whatever he's doing. He's got like these sort of servants almost. So
yeah,
I don't know. I was thinking, okay, is he like a gay character or bisexual? Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's just
no. Well, I think it was kind of coded that Kanchi was his concubine for a bit, and
that as well.
And he got fed up with her, or he felt maybe when the nuns turned up, he got ashamed of it, or something. Because he felt very loose, didn't he, and sort of decadent in some ways, in his dress, really. But in his manners, he was kind of pretty straight-laced. It's very odd. He's a very odd character because his way of talking contradicted how he was dressed and the way he conducted himself in other ways. Turning up drunk at Christmas, things like that.
Yeah.
And he wasn't particularly unrespectful, apart from laughing a bit. And she was really mad at him because, I don't know, because she wanted to shout at him a bit for whatever reason. Got to kiss him, I don't know.
See, because of his redemption at the end and how he responds to Sister Ruth when she, goes down and tries to seduce him, I read that as we don't see obviously his flashbacks like we do with Sister Clodagh, but he has a similar story. Why is he, he's English, I'm guessing. Why is he there in the first place? So again, that, like Sister Clodagh, he's been hurt before, and he says very passionately to Sister Ruth, I don't love anyone. Right. And I think that's, again, a similar reaction to Sister Clodagh in her past. But with Kanchi, I think he was respectful to her. He likes to play with everybody. You know what I mean? I think he was literally looking out for her. That's why he brought her there. He could have left her with him otherwise or whatever. But I think there wasn't anything like that going on. He was very, he just likes to play the part, if that makes sense. And then that would also tie into why he was drunk at Christmas. Christmas, time for family, friends, relationships, loved ones, that, he was drunk because he was upset. Yeah. And but I do have, before I realised he had a pony, I do have a note here that says "dick on a donkey," because why, like that poor donkey, why he had to get on that donkey, well, pony now, I guess. But he had a servant that was just walking beside them. I was like, really?
Yeah.
So
it was kind of a dick move.
We were joking when we were watching it. It was like, I bet that horse is thinking, please just put some trousers on before you sit on me. Please.
Oh, man.
That's funny. So hell of a fit. I mean, let's get to last thoughts, really. I think, have we covered everything? It's just it's a very lush film. isn't it? It really is. Let's go to final thoughts. So Becky, final thoughts.
Just
I
to
can
say
go first
that.
if you like.
Yep, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. I think this is a great piece of British cinema, world cinema, in fact. It's just beautiful. It's got a slight fantasy air, and the fantastic was things they developed way more in other films, but it's got a slightly fantastic air. It's called erotic by some. I'd say it's more sensual. I'd call it more sensual than erotic, but I'm certainly wouldn't buck against someone describing it as like an erotically charged movie, because there's definitely sexual tension throughout. In many ways, and I always thought that the rejection of Ruth was more because he actually wanted Clodagh. I can't quite tell if Dean, just didn't want any of them, or it was because he was more fixated on Clodagh. Because they definitely, him and Sister Clodagh had something going on. There was some tension there. She grew soft, more mellow towards him as time went on, but there was something going on. But yeah, this has been my number one favourite film for parts of my life. It's probably in my top 10. And I've got a couple of films from the Archers, which these two directors were called, in my top 10, and this is one of them. This is a great film. It's almost peerless. It's really hard to think of anything similar to it that's as good. So I really, really like this film. So Becky, your turn.
Just to echo everything that you've said there, and say that I know it's based on a book, I believe from 1939 by Rumer Godden, which I really would like to read. And I think it's very similar. And I think that there was actually a Broadway production that Rumer Godden wrote, but this obviously adaptation was written by Pressburger and Powell. But just a really beautiful film, really interesting in terms of the themes that it explores, specifically from a female perspective, and in terms of the Anglican nuns and how that is different from the usual Catholicism that we would experience in horror largely. And yeah, I think if we're going to rate this film, I think I would have to give it probably 10 out of 10.
Yeah, 10 out of 10 for me too. Licard, what's your thoughts?
It's hard to add to what you guys said. I mean, I think we've really covered it. It's a beautiful film. It's well shot. The story is tremendous. And it does have those horror elements in there, but I think it also stands apart from the genre. I don't typically like drama films, but I would say it is kind of, in many ways, a very good drama. I don't know. I mean, it definitely touches on a lot of things, though. It's fascinating. So yeah, I would also say 10 out of 10. Check it out. It's really good stuff. So colorful, I think that's the thing that stands out to me most, how vibrant it was for a film made in the 40s, and also all the elements that it touches on, as you said, female sexuality, and I was very interested in the religious aspects of it. Of course, both you guys know I'm always interested in religion and horror and things of that nature. So this film really it hits a soft spot for me. So yeah, I definitely say
it's
check
kind
it
of
out.
been given what it's about. Religion really isn't that big part of this film, is it? Given it's about nuns.
Yeah, it's kind of in the background.
It's more about
really.
human condition, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
really weird how the religion is so little.
Yeah, it really
not
is.
part of it.
It's just sort of in the background, honestly.
I have to say, I'm certainly thinking of trying to get maybe a still one of the shots in this film. I'm not even sure which one, because they're so beautiful, and just put it on the wall, because it's really, it's just lovely.
Yeah.
It's really lovely.
Yeah, it's striking.
Yes, great word.
Yeah, it's also I just have to mention also at the time in the US there was a bit of a campaign against this by the National Legion of Decency, because it showed people is an affront to religion, because it characterized religion as an escape for the abnormal, the neurotic, and the frustrated. So yeah, Yeah, sounds right.
And
Yeah.
also, before we kind of close out, I think with the title Black Narcissus, I think the book refers to a perfume shop in France that was called. I apologise for my Manc accent here, but something like Noir Narcissus.
Narcissus,
Yes, and it's just that I think again coming back to those themes of earthly pleasures, decadence, enjoying the here and now rather than like Mark, I think you touched on it when you said these are a group of working nuns. They are doing it's hard. It's a hard life. And it's a lot to give up. And obviously there's a reason that they're all there. As we kind of touch on the backstories, we don't get all of them. We don't get a lot of detail, but I think that's I really enjoy that ambiguity.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like this film could be almost like the female equivalent of like a Foreign Legion film, right? People join the Foreign Legion to escape whatever, or become monks. In fact, there's that too. But there's certainly a touch of that. You could sort of have a masculine version of this, with basically the same themes and same issues and stuff like that. It's certainly that. There's something universal going on here. Which is why this film still stands up, I think, in many ways. It feels quite a modern film still. It's more melodramatic than we're used to now, but in all other respects, it's kind of doesn't feel particularly old-fashioned or anything like that, really.
Yeah,
I would like to see it remade, though.
That would be interesting. Oh, man. It could go either really good or really badly, depending on who is doing that kind of thing,
Yes. Okay. I think we've said all we need to say about this film, really. I mean, we could probably spend another 5 hours talking about it, frankly. We started sort of decomposing the scenes. But yes, so let's wind up there. So bye from me.
Bye from me.
And bye from me.
And until next time on the United Nations of Horror.
Thanks for listening to the United Nations of Horror. Visit us online at www.UNHpodcast.com. Come join us on Facebook to chat about all things horror. Just look up United Nations of Horror and you'll find our group. You can also find us on Twitter at UNH Podcast. And be sure to look for our old episodes on YouTube with added video and some special treats. As always, I want to thank everyone for your continued support. Until next time, I've been Lucar Dragomir, wishing you sweet nightmares.